Oh, wait. Okay. I was gonna pull up just a little, let's see here.
Okay, go ahead. You can do that.
Okay. Yeah, I got it now. Okay. Okay. So content is being sent to a third part. Oh, so this, oh, it's going directly to, okay. You're gonna cue us?
Yes, I will tell you when we're live.
Okay.
Okay, you are live.
Okay. On August 12th, Encore Learning Presents had Alonzo Wind as our speaker. He discussed his amazing experience, which is documented in his book, A Jew in Gaza, Humanitarian Heartbreak, Hubris, and Horrors. So the presentation generated a huge amount of interest, and we recorded it and it's available to view on YouTube right now. We had a great number of questions that helped illuminate the topic and during our Q&A session. But despite going 15 minutes over time, we could not cover all the questions. So Alonzo Wynn has graciously offered to cover those unanswered questions in this follow-up video session, which we also will post to YouTube and we'll link it back to the original one. So we did a full introduction of our speaker, Alonzo Wind, in the original presentation, so I'm not going to duplicate that here. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and answer the questions. Let me take down my screen share. So Alonzo, first question we have here is, if there was a 15-year sea embargo before October 7th, 2023, how did all the needed materials for the tunnel complex get into Gaza?
And thank you very much, David, and thank you, Encore Learning, for hosting this special session. As I think I mentioned at some point in the talk on the 12th, I mean, most, if not all, of those materials came in through tunnels that went under the Egyptian border. Now, these tunnels, to be clear, were not unknown to the Israelis. The Israelis had routinely bombed and tried to collapse them from above repeatedly over the years. Now, how much compliance existed from the Egyptians on that is hard to say. Most Mideast regional commentators have considered the Al-Sisi government in Egypt generally pretty subservient, if not obedient, to Israeli wishes. How accurate that is, I certainly don't know. Certainly, Hamas historically has been linked to the Muslim Brotherhood, which of course has been persecuted by the military-led government, which overthrew the popularly elected Democratic Muslim Brotherhood President Mohammed Morsi in 2013. The security situation in northern Sinai, though, has been precarious for years, and it remains so, with different armed groups that are circulating around. It's not clear why the Egyptians have not been able to secure the area, and really what efforts they may have deliberately made to try to interdict any of the materials coming in from the Egyptian side.
Okay, thanks. Now, this is kind of in a similar vein. Have there been any attempts to get, or talking about the tunnels, or well, these are different tunnels, but have there been any attempts to get Hamas to allow civilians to take refuge in their tunnels network during the attacks?
So I don't believe that ever took place, nor were the tunnels officially acknowledged. I mean, it is true that I had heard from some Gazans about extensive tunnels underneath certain buildings and roads and intersections in Gaza City. There was certainly kind of an open secret about one of the boulevards supposedly having a tunnel. But I always heard of it in the context of tunneled shelters and refuges for the Hamas leadership, not in a description that suggested they were so extensive as appears to be in length and territory. Um, I doubt that Hamas, in their behavior, have ever made any kind of attempt to actually welcome in any portion of the civilian population for protection there in the tunnels.
Okay, interesting. I'm not sure. Well, I'm not sure you'd want to be in those tunnels. I don't know if it'd be safer to be in those tunnels if they're being attacked and by the Israelis. So that's an interesting
True.
aspect of that. Yeah. So can you speak about how events in Gaza actually affect Israel? For example, sewage from Gaza flowing up the coast.
So I think there was a periodic problem in earlier years. For a time, it abated when some efforts at sewage and wastewater cleanup had taken place. There were reports from the World Bank and local Israeli papers, including the Times of Israel, in terms of wastewater treatment efforts that were put into place, I think, in 2018 through about 2021. The Israelis themselves provided some help for that precisely because of the concern about coastal contamination. I believe that the war that took place in May 2021, which had previously been something of a devastating milestone before October 7th of last year, took offline much of that. By the time I arrived in February 2022, I heard that waters that had been getting the coastal waters that had been getting cleaner and not visibly so polluted were once again getting contaminated because of the lack of capacity for sewage and wastewater treatment beyond some very limited efforts. Now, that certainly didn't stop Gazans from flocking to the beaches when they could. I found the beaches to be quite dirty and limited myself to walking along the shore road, Ar Rashid. Generally, the beaches south of Gaza City and Deir al-Balah were visibly cleaner.
So yeah, so obviously the Gazan beaches have been not necessarily the best tourist type beaches in the past, and now it's made it worse. But I guess it's also true on some beaches in Israel, if there are beaches, I guess. I don't know.
Sure, and it's, really not just the beaches. I think it's fair to say, going beyond even the intent of this question, that there was an issue in Gaza, and I talk about this in my book as well with a few pictures of a lack of a culture or a willingness or prioritization of hygiene and cleanliness in terms of garbage pickup overall. I mean, it was a problem in terms of the dumping of garbage in a lot of streets. There were certain lots that were filled with garbage. There were a certain number of efforts, cursory efforts maybe on some level. Perhaps it was limited by the fact that Hamas and the Gazan civilian leadership could not bring in garbage trucks per se into Gaza. But I would frequently see these horse-drawn open-air carriages carrying garbage, and you'd see, people, especially young people and elderly people, without any kind of protection, just kind of picking up the garbage and putting it on there where it would be kind of carried out by horse-drawn carriage to some kind of centralized dumping area where it might be burned, or in some cases, perhaps dumped all too close to the coast itself. So that was a continuing problem. There was also an issue, frankly, of contamination in the air. Uh, there was on the Israeli side, I think near Ashkelon, these what do you call them? Incinerators, incinerator chimneys, and sometimes there would be a blow off of that onto Gaza, adding to the kind of shared pollution. Unfortunately, the reality of living so close to each other between Gaza and the coastal cities of southern Israel. Ashkelon itself is pretty close. I guess it's probably within about 20 kilometers of the border of the northern part of the Gaza Strip. bigger cities heading up towards Bat Yam and Tel Aviv were further up the coast, but still you're only talking about maybe 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers, about 25 miles or so.
Yeah. Okay, so another question we have is there any evidence that Hamas has pillaged trucks bringing food and aid into Gaza?
So in terms of the pillaging of trucks or the deviation of food and aid, I think we can separate out the period before October 7th from the period after, because they're two very different circumstances. Before October 7th, there were periodically these accusations that were being made about the deviation of humanitarian aid going into Gaza that could be benefiting Hamas. This was not just an issue in terms of humanitarian aid, but also commercial shipping, commercial trucking, I should say, of stuff that was coming in, commodities into Gaza through particularly the Rafah as well as uh, Kerem Shalom in the southern part. Um, there were a few notorious and completely unfounded accusations about Hamas seizing truck aid and deviating assistance going in that hit a number of different aid agencies, including this terrible case that I think I referred to in the video of World Vision that had been victimized by the Israelis as well as actually right-wing American activists with some wild accusations. There were claims on the part of Israelis that, and in fact, this went into an Israeli court, that tubes and things connected with the construction of a water system have been deviated and had gone to Hamas to help them be able to build weapons and the like. None of that was ever proven. In fact, there were independent uh, investigations, verification by auditors that proved that this didn't take place. And INGOs, international NGOs that had serious funding and resources, all had very careful tools and systems in place to avoid the deviation of assistance away from intended beneficiaries. Now, since October 7th, of course, that's been ever so much more difficult. Of course, the overall volume of aid going into Gaza is a mere fraction of what it was before October 7th. In the best case scenario, you're talking about, in terms of overall shipping, trucking into Gaza, only about 1/5 of the volumes after October 7th being allowed in compared to the period before October 7th. There's also very dangerous circumstances and a complete lack of security for distribution, the risk of getting bombed and shot, even when supposedly deconflicted with the IDF. Really, the risk is multiplied 100-fold. In fact, trucks bringing aid in are not allowed to come into Gaza itself frequently, but they have to go into this no man's land on the border where they're physically moved from a truck coming from Egypt onto these flatbeds coming from Gaza itself and transferred. Those kind of circumstances really increase the risk of deviation. I think the deviation that's taken place since, there may have been some deviation by Hamas, but frankly, there's been many more known cases of attacks and pillaging by a desperate population. Gangs have developed in the chaos across much of Gaza. There's no effective policing in Gaza with the security situation the way it's been. And of course, with the increase of starvation in the north, that's also made it very difficult in terms of any efforts to truck things up to the north and hope for any kind of effective distribution to identified organizational entities. The risk of pillaging is really so much greater, as well as the risk of harm to drivers bringing, goods in.
Okay, so This next question relates to a topic that you covered, I think, spent some time on the original presentation with regard to the difficulties that Christian churches face during this conflict. And so the question is it possible the behavior towards some Christian churches may have something to do with perhaps overeager missionary activities? And, we don't have any more detail on exactly what these activities, overeager activities are, but if you could just give your thoughts on that perspective, I guess.
So when I first saw this question, I thought initially that they were talking about in Gaza. And, just to say, I never saw or heard of any sort of Christian missionary activities in Gaza, or for that matter, in any other Muslim countries. But I think perhaps I misunderstood the questioner's intent. I think that probably this is a reference in terms of the behavior towards some Christian churches in Israel itself, because I had mentioned this problem in Israel in terms of what was increasing attacks on Christian churches in the old city of Jerusalem. And, I think that, this was not so much against any kind of missionary activity, but really against established ancient churches. The attacks by ultra-Orthodox Jews and ultra-right-wing extremists against Christian properties, cemeteries, and churches in the old city seemed to be against the denominations in the old city, such as the Roman Catholic, the Latin and Greek Orthodox, and the Armenian churches. I don't think that Christian missionary activity plays any kind of role in terms of any of those churches. And certainly there were multiple denunciations of these attacks around the end of last year, as well as after New Year's, by church leadership. There was also, frankly, a lot of increasing pressure from the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, largely instigated by some of these more right-wing elements within the Netanyahu cabinet that were trying to take away any sort of tax exemptions that had been previously provided to these Christian properties.
So it sounds like it's your opinion that there was nothing that these Christian church or their congregation engaged in that in essence would provoke some kind of attack or reaction from Israelis or the Gazans for that matter.
Not that
Right.
I ever was aware of. Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks for covering that. So, let's see. I'm trying to look. I think the last question is maybe I'm reading this wrong. How do you imagine Hamas participating in negotiations for peace when they threaten those Palestinians who are negotiating for peace in good faith? Hamas' mission is to destroy Israel. No negotiation on that. Yeah, so it goes the whole peace negotiation, which there's now a lot of talk in the news. And maybe you can give your answer this specifically, and give your thoughts in general as to, are we going to get some kind of peace negotiation soon? Will we ever get a peace negotiation? Will it just be something where it just continues on in this kind of state for a long, long time?
Yeah, I know Secretary of State Blinken is there now, and on what I think is his 9th mission in terms of trying to promote peace negotiations in the region. And, the whole idea of bad faith is something that's been bandied around constantly. Supposedly, the Americans put forward another proposal onto the table. Hamas, at least from what I saw on the news this morning, was not accepting the so-called American proposal and saying that they would not participate in the next round of negotiations, which are taking place in Cairo. To my knowledge, last week, there had been several days of negotiations in which the Israelis had not participated. Now the Israelis say they will participate and Hamas won't participate. I mean, I do think there have been a number of reports about how, some of the Hamas leaders like Yahya Sinwar are psychopathic and really have no interest in peace. And while certainly that may be the case, I think pragmatically, uh, the Hamas leadership surely want, at the very least, if not peace, a ceasefire. They want a permanent ceasefire, in terms of, being able to, consolidate and on some level recover from what has been these many months of bombings and attacks. Uh, Listening to Secretary Blinken's remarks, I mean, certainly there's a lot of evidence that the State Department and the White House have been exasperated by the lack of good faith and sincerity by Prime Minister Netanyahu, even when some loud voices in his cabinet, such as Defense Minister Gallant, have pushed for an end to the fighting. The IDF leadership has said that there's really no more real military targets. And yet, frankly, the US government at the same time has allowed that kind of behavior to go on unpunished without consequences. And that's one of the things I questioned in our session on the 12th in terms of the reasoning of the Biden administration, the logic of the Biden administration in terms of allowing, a new multi-billion-dollar arms package to go through with the Israelis, even where there's certainly every sign to show that there's no serious interest in part of the Netanyahu government in terms of the safekeeping of the hostages, the rescue of the hostages, and even considering how many hostages may in fact still be alive. Hamas's mission, on some level, arguably is to destroy Israel. As I think has been mentioned, I think one of the comments the questioner had also been in terms of how much information on all this is getting through to Israelis. I mean, I think many Israelis have been in their own echo chambers. Perhaps it's a similar thing to what we encounter here in the States, where, both sides tend to listen to their own media, their own cable news networks, their own streaming platforms, and you get very radically different view of reality, particularly since one side seems to be perfectly willing to concoct their own sort of alternate reality from what is more conventionally understood to be the facts of the matter. I think many Israelis have not been aware of counter narratives outside of, their own government. I think there are many moderate groups in Israel that have been trying to raise their voices. I think some of our participants flagged it in the comments and the feedback. But I think they need help to amplify and overcome the voice of the extremists, in terms of really the danger to Israel and its fundamentals. I mean, one of the things that's really come to light that I did want to share, to flag for people that we didn't really manage to talk about last week is what the work of B'Tselem has been highlighting. B'Tselem is a group that is largely made up of demobilized, returned Israeli veterans from the IDF who've been trying to work towards peace. They and other Israeli civil society organizations have been penalized by different Israeli institutions. They've been threatened with losing their registration. They've been warned that any foreign money going into their bank accounts would be taxed at punitive tax rates, all to kind of shut off that kind of alternative voice. If there's time, I'll try to share my screen and just share quickly what I'm referring to. Let's see if I have this here correctly. And before we get to that, let me just go here to highlight here a link that for those that are interested, I would suggest they go to btselem.org/publications. You can also just do a Google search on B'Tselem, Welcome to Hell. This is just an extremely painful presentation, a report that's come out on the Israeli prison system. Now, I have to emphasize for our listeners, this is coming from Israelis themselves who have been challenging not just the practice of incarceration of Palestinians, but they have looked at what has in fact been the creation of a network of torture camps, of abuse and inhuman treatment of Palestinians since October 7th. They collected testimony from 55 Palestinians held during that time and released, almost all with no charges. Not only that, but B'Tselem has been talking about a known pattern of sexual abuse of Palestinian prisoners. Now, it's worth mentioning that this was brought up last week in questioning at the State Department, the U.S. State Department, to, I think his name is Mark Miller, the State Department spokesman, in which he was asked, is this something that the U.S. government countenances? And he admitted that, in fact, the U.S. government had seen last week the videos that have been released by some different platforms of Palestinian prisoners being sexually abused, raped, physically attacked with broomsticks and the like. And the fact that there was this remarkable exchange in the Knesset last week when more moderate members of the Israeli Knesset challenged this and questioned this, saying that this is a violation of basic values of the Israelis in terms of the treatment of Palestinian prisoners. And in fact, one of the extremist members of Netanyahu's cabinet actually defended it. And when the one member of the Knesset said, can we justify, raping with a broomstick, the penetration into the rectum of a Palestinian prisoner of a broomstick? This extremist member of the cabinet actually said, yes, all things are allowed, all things are tolerated, which is really reprehensible. It's important to emphasize that this is not coming from me. This is coming from Israeli media, Israeli civil society organizations, and video proof of this, which is not being presented only to the United Nations and the International Court of Justice, but it's in the hands of the State Department, which acknowledged and accepted this and said that they denounce it, and they said that there is zero tolerance for this type of sexual abuse of Palestinian prisoners. And yet, we've gone forward with the release of many billions of dollars of military aid for Israel, despite accepting and acknowledging that, in fact, this kind of abuse is taking place. And of course, this is being challenged by thousands of protesters now out in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention, not because the Democrats themselves have any sole culpability about this, but of course, the Democratic Party they see as being more willing to actually listen to these kinds of complaints and denunciations. So the one final point that I just wanted to add in terms of B'Tselem, which I heard about last night, and frankly, I was shocked at, is B'Tselem was able to document that over the course of the Israeli occupation, from 1967, the occupation of the Palestinian territories, about 20% of the total Palestinian population, or a total of about 800,000 Palestinians, have actually gone through incarceration within the Israeli prison system. Now, many of these were maybe.
What was that number again? What was that? Maybe it bears repeating.
Yeah, it's incredible. About 800,000 Palestinians have been incarcerated through the Israeli prison system since the beginning of the occupation in 1967. This represents 40% of all Palestinian males. So if you can imagine, you have a system in place, and people say, well, how can you refer to apartheid? How can you refer to, what exists within the incarceration system of the occupied Palestinian territories, West Bank and Gaza? I mean, you're talking about 40%. That's 2/5 of all Palestinian males and about 20% of the Palestinian population. So it's a huge total that have been cycling through. And many of these people have not gone through trial. Many of these people are being held, never actually being brought into any kind of judicial process in which they are charged, in which they are found guilty, in which they are convicted. I mean, the vast majority are being held under the terms of essentially military justice, military occupation. There's very few parts of the world, if any, that can, rival that kind of, system of treatment of inmates and, this kind of suffering that's existed, including what Israelis themselves have called de facto torture camps.
Yeah, and I know that incarceration system has gotten some press coverage in the U.S., although I have to say that is astounding that the numbers 800,000, 2/5 of all males have gone through the system. That's something I have not seen covered in any way in American press. And although I have seen it's not just men, it's also often young women as well that are putting up some resistance and get caught up in that net as well.
And children as well.
Yeah.
No, it's certainly the case. Now, this is unfortunately not that alien, of course. I mean, not to get into, too much of a rhetorical overreach or whatever, but certainly, it's been questioned that here in the States, we've had, certainly something of a not too distant order of magnitude when it, reflects what has happened for many young African American men here in the States in terms of the percentage of Black Americans, particularly young African American men, who end up going through, an incarceration process, within urban centers of the States. And that's not to say that I'm comparing what takes place in American prisons with what has been happening within the Israeli prison system. But I think many people should still be familiar with, of course, the horrible news that came out of the Iraqi occupation from the American military, Abu Ghraib, and the terrible things that took place at that time. That is minor and minuscule compared to what's been going on as part of the Israeli occupation of Palestine since 1967. And of course, how that has increased in far more dramatic terms since October 7th. Particularly this description of a network of torture camps and the degree of sexual abuse and rape of Palestinian prisoners is something that has been denounced by B'Tselem as being particularly something that has increased dramatically since October 7th.
So one more thing just before we close this out. I mean, we're through with all the questions, but I do want to give you an opportunity to address the perspective that some people have that there's another side to this story. And you kind of alluded to, what the Israelis are being told. And I know I'm just generalizing, you can probably do this better than I can, that in essence, they feel all of this is justified. I mean, not just this recent spate of violence, but everything from the beginning of the establishment of Israel. It's all necessary to preserve and safeguard the existence of Israel. What are your thoughts in terms of the justification of that perspective, either in part or in full, and how many of the Israeli citizens essentially take that to heart and feel, essentially 100% comfortable with all of these things that you've just described, the actions that Israelis have taken over the years and recently with the attack in Gaza?
So I see we're almost running on another hour after the talk on the 12th, but and I could probably talk for hours on this thing alone, but let me just refer back to something that I talked extensively about on August 12th, and that is, the basic issue first of proportionality. I understand and am sympathetic to what have been both past as well as current Israeli fears in terms of the loss of life from terrorist attacks that have happened in the past in Israel, the threat of attack from neighbors, and certainly the horrific events of October 7th. I mean, all of that is certainly understandable. But there is a basic principle of proportionality. And you cannot say that the number of Israeli victims that have suffered represents anything close to what has been the huge amount of Palestinians and Gazans who have suffered from this occupation. The other thing that I'll say just very quickly is the issue, the basic question of, is Israel any safer now in terms of the result of the occupation, the expansion of the settlements and the outposts, compared to what it would be if in fact the Palestinian problem had been resolved years ago? I hardly think so. I mean, the threat of attack from Iran, the threat of attack from Lebanon with Hezbollah, the threat of attack from other parts is a function of this unresolved problem for the Palestinians. I think I lost the share screen, but
oh well, I took it down. I didn't know, was there something? Oh, you can share again if you want to do the video. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to share quickly something that was lost to many of our viewers. Here we go. I think this is it here. In terms of the volume, this shows from Al Jazeera two of our workers for international technical, young Zan, who worked in our logistics, and young Ibrahim, who worked in our monitoring and evaluation team. They were separated in November when they tried to leave through Rafah, and in fact,
hey, Alonzo. So the music was very loud. So in terms of the background, why don't you go ahead and give the background on this now? I mean, we've seen the
Okay.
video, and go ahead, and because your voice wasn't able to,
Yeah, my apology for that. I tried to lower it, but I don't know how much of that came across. So I had referred to this, and I think many people said they couldn't see the video. And basically, this is an Instagram post that was taken from Al Jazeera news cuts at the Rafah crossing back in November. And I talked about this couple uh, in the talk on August 12th and shared, in fact, some of the words from Suzanne, who happened to have a Jordanian passport as well. She was able to escape into Jordan in the end and is in Amman, but her husband, Ibrahim, remains in Gaza and somewhat unaccounted for at that point. So I just wanted to give people who couldn't see the video for whatever reason the chance to actually see it this time from that posting.
right, right. I appreciate it. So yes, here we've created probably at least 45 minutes of additional material, and I want to thank you so much, Alonzo, for your book, which is a fantastic book, and I highly recommend it. People can go to whatever bookseller that you normally go to and find the book A Jew in Gaza. It's well worth the read, even if you've watched the full hour and a half, no, 2.5 hours plus of material that we have put now, we'll be putting up on YouTube. But it's been very, very interesting, even if some of it is very disturbing. But I think all of us really appreciate you illuminating the situation and providing information that, I mean, it's very difficult to get anywhere else, quite frankly. And you obviously have had the perspective and the experience to understand it much more deeply and fully than well, certainly all of us watching and many other people that have been involved. Obviously, the Gazans are experiencing it firsthand, and that's what's important, I think, for everyone to gain a better appreciation, which I think we have with your original talk and with this addendum. So I want to thank you again, Alonzo, for the time that you've provided. We really appreciate it.
Thank you again, David. I understand you're a volunteer in these efforts as well, and much appreciated your tremendous efforts in terms of helping to facilitate this. And I'd encourage, if any viewers are watching this and if they'd like me to, look into possibilities of talking at their synagogues or churches, to go into more detail. I know I had a friend a couple of days ago reach out to me, connected with the Society of Friends and the American Friends Service Committee, in terms of suggesting that I participate in some discussions with them. Certainly, I've been speaking at a number of synagogues in the Washington, D.C. area, and I'm very willing to speak in terms of amplifying this news and unfortunate experience to as many who are willing to listen.
Okay, great. And I'll just kind of switching gears here. I'll mention anyone that's watching this here in August of 2024, we are getting ready, Encore Learning, that is, getting ready to do our fall session of classes. So if you're at all interested, you can go to our website, www.encorelearning.net, that's .net, and take a look at the offerings that we have. I just think there's some very interesting ones. So that obviously doesn't pale to the gravity of the topic that we have teed up here, but nonetheless, I did want to put that pitch in. So, okay, with that, we'll end it, and